Okay, I think we can just start the session. Thank you and welcome to everyone to the Tools and Techniques Thursday micro class. Today's topic that we'll be looking at is business analysis as a frontier for privacy in organization. Why BAs are primarily suited to drive the privacy agenda. So we are excited to hear about this topic and I hope you will enjoy it. But before we do that, just a few pointers that I would like to share with you. I know, to be my own boss, sorry about the song. So just some quick rules around the presentation. As I said, I will be hosting the presentation today. My name is Lau Bobe. You can call me Lau or Sila or whatever is comfortable with you. I'm used to all sorts of names, but yeah, they all belong to me. I own them. The quick rules is that the presentation will take 45 minutes long. You may post your questions in the main chat. We'll read them out to the presenter when it is time for Q&A. The presentation will be uploaded to our YouTube, the IIBA YouTube page. Unfortunately, we can't send the presentation deck. So that's the URL for the YouTube. To become a member of IIBA SA, you can go to the IIBA org organization, business analysis membership / individual, or you can email to Johannesburg at South Africa IIBA.org. Okay. So in terms of benefits for IIBA membership, you will have access to online library of featuring over 11,000 titles, access to member exclusive webinar, also access to publications, articles, and so on, exclusive access to global community of BAs, and saving up to 40% of on globally recognized professional certificates and discounts on conferences. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce Warren to you today that will be taking us through the topic of tonight. And I'm just gonna introduce Warren in terms of his background, and then we can actually just start enjoying the presentation. And obviously, when we get to Q&A, please feel free to post your questions. Okay. So let me just get my words. Sorry about that. Okay, Warren is a data protection specialist with experience in telecoms, financial services, and consulting sectors. He has developed extensive knowledge in areas such as information privacy, IT governance, risk management, and successful implementation of business analysis projects in large-scale environments, including implementing privacy and regulatory implementation projects in multiple JSE listed and public sector organizations. Warren started his career as a business analyst and is now transitioning into a specialized role in information risk and data privacy. Please, everyone, let's welcome Warren. And Warren, over to you. If you're ready, please, you can take over the screen.
Thanks, Lau, and thank you very much for that. I guess it's a glowing introduction. Let me see if I can, if you can see my screen, and then we'll start from there.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Please let me know if you can see the screen, and then I'll be able to start.
Yes, we can
We
see
can-
it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the IIBA, I think, for the opportunity to present today. And as already has been highlighted, the title for my presentation is that we are, as BAs, I think we're at the frontier for information privacy in multiple organizations. And I'm putting together a case study or a hypothesis to say BAs or business analysts are more suited to drive the privacy agenda. You can see there in the picture there that as business analysts, sometimes we are most, let me, from an introduction point of view, we are quite involved in multiple initiatives within the organization that enables us to understand the organization, know where information is, and that's really the approach that I'm taking through. Just from a disclaimer perspective, the information that I'm sharing does not represent the opinions or professional advice from my employer, neither does it constitute what I would call professional advice. This is personal opinion and cannot be linked in any way to the organization that I work with or in organizations that I've worked in previously. Nor does it also represent the opinions of the IIBA as well. From an agenda perspective, so we'll start with the introduction in terms of PI, personal information, what the problem statement is. We then go through into privacy principles, some call it privacy. So maybe you'll hear me going in between words, information privacy principles, privacy by design challenges that are faced by organizations. And then we then go into the privacy by design principles. And then lastly, practical implementation or implications around that. That's the key thing in terms of how I'll do the presentation. At the end of the presentation or at the end of this discussion, I hope that we would have discussed the concept of privacy by design to the audience, as well as discuss the practicalities of privacy by design, what it means. I'm sure in some of your organizations, if you are in one of these big organizations, there's already talk about let's do privacy by design, or you may have had issues in where some of your projects have not been approved, or you have had delays because of privacy requirements or prior requirements. And if you deal with the audience from the European Union, for example, you also now deal with what is called GDPR. And again, as I said, out of this, it's to discuss how as BAs we can then best influence privacy by design across the organization. So at a very high level, to introduce information privacy, I'll start with the problem statement. Key things, most organizations struggle with info that they do not know the information under their custody. And again, from a business analysis perspective, we go into different areas. You can go into HR, you can go into multiple areas. Business does not know information that they manage. We also have poor understanding of the permissions that we have when we have to use information. We'll speak about processing basis and justifications in terms of what it means. And you've had a lot of people throwing in things like consent, where, okay, we're using consent, or we're using contract, or we're using various methods to process information. From a BA or a data analyst perspective, data quality issues, I'm sure, again, from experience, some of you've dealt with instances where you are given unusable data sets because we never implemented these rules when we were collecting information. There's what is called excessive processing of personal information, where information that was requested from one particular area or for a particular purpose is now used for additional things or additional means or additional purposes. Information maybe was collected for purposes of maybe you joined a corporate race, and then that information is then maybe passed on to a particular department, and they then start using it either to sell you products or to do some further analytics that were not mentioned. We also have the issue with the fluidity and dynamic nature of information, especially with technological advancements such as AI, which influence the issue of privacy. And everyone is jumping onto the bandwagon of these AI tools. And we've seen in certain instances where personal information is used in AI tools, yet we do not know what those AI tools do with that particular information. There's multiple and increasing data privacy protection and artificial intelligence legislation. So from an information point of view, in South Africa, for example, we have the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act, we have the Protection of Personal Information Act, we have the Promotion of Access to Information Act, we also have the Cyber Crimes Act, and soon, maybe not necessarily in South Africa, but in the European Union, they've actually passed on the artificial intelligence legislation, and soon that should also be coming through maybe in the South African jurisdiction as well. And then the other thing is your organization is bigger, then the bigger the problem of understanding areas of various integrations, touch points, and data sharing. There are some organizations that are so huge, there is information that is flowing in and out of the organization. And in certain instances, there's APIs that are not known. There's third parties who are used and they receive information, whichever method is utilized to transfer that information, but it's not recorded or not known. And then lastly, the cost of non-compliance resulting in reward. And again, maybe by point of comment or some maybe reaction, I'm sure there are some on the call who've had their projects either approved, disapproved, or maybe suspended because you involved your privacy office too late in the process and you wanted to send data to America, for example, and then your privacy officer came and told you that you're doing what is called cross-border processing. And by that time, it's too late. The solution has already been bought and you're about to go live. And then you think, okay, let's now get signature from privacy office. And then they say no. Those are some of the challenges that we are facing from an information point of view. I will not go into a lot of detail with regards to personal information. I'm sure some of you've heard what the Protection of Personal Information Act, or POPIA, or POPI in the South African Act. In the South African space, that's the act that controls how we use information. And when we talk about a person, we're looking at a natural or juristic person. Personal information involves any information relating to an identifiable living natural person or juristic person. So in this instance, anything that can be used to identify an individual: name, surname, ID number, email addresses. And these are data sets that you are dealing with from a data privacy point of view. Special personal information then involves things like religious, philosophical beliefs, race, ethnic origins, and many other aspects that relate to a person. And from a data processing perspective, it's very rare that you have personal information that does not necessarily have SPI, or special personal information. In certain organizations, they use things like PII, your personally identifiable information. So it becomes quite critical because this information is who the person is. When you see the name Warren, you already know that there's a particular person. If you put a surname, then you narrow the reach or the identifiability of a person If we put the ID number, then it becomes even a little bit more identifiable. So as we add additional data elements to a particular subject or to a particular person, they become more identifiable. And in organizations, sometimes when we request information, we get multiple fields that are quite identifiable, and then people end up misusing them. What I thought is to also provide a very high level of what the privacy principles in most data protection legislation talk about. We have 8 processing conditions in the South African environment, as well as 4 special conditions. Accountability refers to the setting up of the governance structures within the organization, making sure that everyone is trained, there's your sufficient authority in terms of your information officers, your privacy officers, and your deputy information officers. Quite key, but maybe from a BA perspective, not something that we can influence. Processing limitation, that's an area that we'll need to talk about a little bit later. But processing limitation refers to when you receive information, make sure that you use it for the purpose that you collected it for, and you use it for a justifiable means. You need to have a reason for collecting information, and it needs to be lawful. Purpose specification, use information for a defined purpose. Further processing limitation means if I've collected information for purposes of you are an employee and I need to collect information to pay you salaries and other things, I can't now use that information to do other things that are not related to the original purpose, unless if it's required by law. So for example, I can collect information in processing limitation or in the purpose for purposes of paying tax because you're an employee. Further processing limitation, for example, I can't now use that information that I collected to sell maybe some other information because it's not related to the purposes of tax. Openness refers to we need to make sure that we are transparent about the information that we use. Most organizations, you know now, if you go on their websites, they've got a prior manual, they've got a privacy policy or privacy notice. And then also even on most websites, you'll see that there's now notices about collection of cookies when you are on a particular website. Information quality, we need to make sure that information is up to date, it's accurate, and it's not misleading. That's also an area where business analysts can contribute effectively as well. Data subjects refers to as an individual. So as an individual, I own the information that belongs to me. And sometimes in organizations, we have data owners and everything, but what the Act says, what the legislation says is information belongs to the person. So the employee who gives you their name, surname, ID, and their bank account number for purposes of paying their salary, that information belongs to them. So as a data subject, I've got rights, for example, to ask for you to correct my information, for you to make sure that I can choose for you to delete information, I can choose for you to correct information. So it links to information quality, it links to openness, and it also links to issues around how do we enable the ability to delete or to dispose of information when it's no longer required, or to de-identify that information. De-identification means we cannot use, we make sure that that information is not identifiable to a person. I'm still to find organizations in South Africa that are able to say we've effectively done de-identification. I guess maybe because data protection legislation is quite new. Security safeguards, mainly your information security or technical controls, but it also talks to third parties as well. And mostly when we write our business requirements specifications, system specifications, we usually just treat security requirements as either non-functional requirements which is correct because it's not really speaking to the functionality of the system. But I think with the amount of legislation that's there, it's quite critical that we do not treat them as just mere non-functional requirements. If you were to, again, from an experience perspective, your non-functional requirements, most people, when they're reviewing documents, they don't even look at them. They will just pass, oh, okay, it's a non-functional requirement, and they pass. They do not necessarily take that into consideration. But now with data processing legislation, it's actually quite a critical thing that we consider all of these conditions. Then one of the things that are there as well, for the purposes of time, these 4 special conditions then speak to issues where consent is mainly required, where it speaks to direct marketing, calling of people, but or SMSing people, or even sending of emails. This is where most people have made the misconception of thinking that, okay, because people call me and I didn't give them my number, then they are non-compliant with POPIA. Yes, in certain instances, non-compliant, but this is just a 12th of the entire requirements of the Act. There's issues around cross-border. Information must be processed within South Africa, or at least into a country that has got a relative comparable legislation. Also with the permission of the data subjects or with the permission of the information regulator. Now we're using a lot of hosting, especially with your AWSs, your Microsofts, your Google, your Oracle. Most organizations have moved into the cloud, and there's issues around cross-border processing because some of the cloud hosting facilities, their primary locations may be in South Africa, but their redundant sites and everything are located in other areas, which then becomes an issue from an information processing perspective. Children's information is quite sensitive. It's considered special personal information on its own. So we need to make sure that children's information is protected, including the special personal information that we process as well. Like I said in the earlier slide, there's been some misconceptions. So in organizations, you'll see that most people, when we talk about information privacy, will then say, okay, we don't really deal with PI. So information privacy is just about consent. It's an opt-in, opt-out. If we manage that, or we don't need to do that, then we don't really need to do information privacy requirements. There's also people who say information privacy, if we just do information security technical controls, we've managed our security, we've managed our information privacy, but it's not necessarily the truth. Then there's also people who talk about if from an information privacy, if we don't keep information for longer than required, we've already met the requirements. Or there are other people who, and again, I think, especially from an IT perspective, most people would assume that the information privacy officer, or whatever you call them in your organization, they are restricting you from innovation, they're restricting you from using information, or their blocker in terms of the type of work that you want to do. But I think let's look at it from a technology, process, policy, people perspective, and see what would come up with from an information privacy point of view. We then go into privacy by design. So the earlier part was just trying to give a very high level background in terms of where we are coming from, why the legislation, and the fact that we are processing information quite a lot on the internet, and maybe not necessarily on public platforms, but everything that we are doing, we are really using connected networks. So we need to ensure that we protect the privacy of all individuals that we collect information from, and that we use it with the correct usage basis or lawful justification. So then if we go into the privacy by design concept, at a very high level, privacy by design means let's think of privacy when we are early in the business analysis phase. That's what it really says. By the time we share our requirements with the developers and everything, we then need to make sure that those privacy requirements have already been catered for. In my analysis, I didn't look at any particular BA methodology. You could be in a waterfall process, so maybe you follow a very linear process, or you could be in an agile environment. You could make sure that your requirements, maybe they need to follow a particular part. Maybe your privacy requirements then become part of your acceptance criteria if you are in a Scrum or Agile environment. And maybe when you are at least when you're in the waterfall, you can follow this particular process. But I think the cost of change when we come to this part is the same, whether you're in a waterfall environment or you're in an agile environment or any other requirements analysis and development methodology that you can be using. If we were to incorporate privacy requirements, for example, when we're doing the analysis or requirements gathering, the cost of change at that point, most probably you are looking at a few hours or a few days of work. Analysis and design, most probably you're looking at a cost of about a few, let's say maybe a few days and a few weeks. Once you start incorporating your privacy requirements when you're now or in coding, you'll see that the cost becomes quite critical. So let's take the example, let's say we were supposed to incorporate the requirements that we can't send data into a location that is not permitted. If I was in requirements, for example, then I understand I can't send data to, let's say, Mauritius, for example. I then make it a rule here in our acceptance criteria, and we are now engaging the particular service providers in solution. We already make it a requirement. That will most probably be a workshop or something, and maybe even 2 weeks of work, not even 2 weeks of work, maybe 2 hours of work. This is just conceptual. Please take note that these are not effort estimations. In your analysis and design, we've already made the requirements clear that we don't want data to go to these particular areas. You need to use these particular fields. By the time they code and or they are purchasing the particular solution, we've already specified those requirements. Imagine if we didn't take note of those requirements, the solution is there, hosting is done in South Africa and in other secondary jurisdictions, which then is found at production. The cost of trying to retain that data, the cost of doing so many things, is going to be quite restrictive. So you'll now end up with issues around trying to do, to reverse those things, and even in certain instances being fined. I didn't put the fines that certain organizations have been fined. Maybe in the South African environment, it's still a little bit early. We've only seen maybe one organization, I think that was the Department of Justice, that was fined 5 million rands by the information regulator. But the guys in Europe are quite serious. They fine in the region of billions of euros and not necessarily the minuscule amounts that we're seeing in South Africa. And the fact that most South African organizations have got global operations, it's quite critical then that we also take note of those particular fines that are being issued to organizations that do not comply with these requirements. I think as of the last research that I did, Facebook or Meta, they were fined about 1.2 billion euros. That's about 25 billion, 22, 23 billion rands just for fines. A South African organization will most probably fold if such a fine was to be issued on us. So if we go into the privacy by design principles, we need to ensure that privacy needs to be proactive, not reactive. So at the beginning. So we'll go through the process at a high level, how we can contribute. We need it to be preventive, not remedial. Also building with the privacy mindset. If you are building a house, or if you are buying a house or buying a car, you already come with security requirements that you want from either the car. You want it to be safe, you want it to be so that it doesn't break down on the road. You already specify an acceptance criteria. So we need to ensure that we already specify certain things. So for example, if I'm working, let's say, in a BI center, or I'm working in the data lakes where data is being used for analysis, most of the times, so for example, auditors will come and request for information. I've seen in certain instances where people will just click download all, and a full data set or a full database is put onto Excel, sent via email with so many data elements that are sometimes not necessary. Whereas we can already start building these rules in our systems at the design phase. So embed those rules into design. And then from a full functionality point of view, we believe that privacy is not something that is there to restrict. We believe that you can still have privacy requirements and still achieve full functionality. And like I said earlier, privacy is not there to stop you from using information, but we're saying use information responsibly, have a purpose that is accepted by law, make sure that you've got the necessary permissions if required, and you're using the information at the minimum information to achieve the goal. It also helps from a security perspective. End-to-end security, full life cycle protection from the point the information is collected until the end. Visibility and transparency, again, as referenced earlier, we have information privacy notices on most websites. We have notices for cookies and stuff that are also on websites. Let's make sure that how we process this information is documented. And then also, it's from a human rights perspective and from an ethical perspective, it's also respecting the user privacy. In our personal lives, we don't want our information in our personal spaces for this information to be abused or used for other purposes. Let's also apply the same requirements when it comes to users or customers or employees or any data subjects that we deal with. So I've done a lot of talking that sometimes may then, where do we go, or where is this frontier thing that we were talking about? I've taken these BA phases at a very high level: needs analysis, business case, analysis, design, build, and then we have the test and deployment. So how I've built the BA contribution areas, or in terms of how I think as business analysts we can contribute. So the description from a needs analysis, so working, this assumption is also working in conjunction with your privacy offices or with your data protection teams. And I'm sure there's processes that are already there in your organizations. So when I'm doing the needs analysis, besides the necessary requirements that I'm doing for the solution, we need to know the initiative, identify impacted processes. So you'll see now where, as business analysts, we come through. Sometimes organizations would bring in a risk person or a compliance person to try and understand which processes. The best person to understand the processes and the initiative is a BA. Some organizations then have what is called a mini PI assessment or privacy impact assessment that helps you to understand what type of initiative is it, and will it result in any compliance requirements later. And at this point, we could determine that there's no need to involve the privacy office because we are not dealing with any privacy requirements. Your key deliverables from or from an understanding of the privacy office Sometimes it's a gap analysis documents or a PI assessment, meaning your key pain points. There's an issue with multiple legislation with varying requirements. And then also the problem here is that your solution is not yet fully known. So maybe at this point, it's just really a conceptual understanding, but sometimes it's key to, we know what the pain is in the organization or in the business. By this time, we have a very limited understanding that can help us to determine if we need to go into more detailed understanding. Similarly, at the business case point of view, and this is where sometimes when your business case is being written, the solution is determined at this point. We will come through this part, do analysis, do design, but most probably by the business case, this is where the approval is done. You've already been approved to go into the cloud. You've already been approved to use maybe certain solution providers, and which then, if we do a business case without doing the relevant assessments again from a PI perspective, this could also then jeopardize the whole process. So imagine you've done a proof of concept, it's working, but it's not aligning with the requirements from a legislation point of view. You already have a business case approved, there's budget allocated, then you then come and do your full PIA or a PIA in analysis, and you realize there's so many risks that are impacted. Ideally, by the time you do your business case, because there's detailed analysis here, again, you could be able to do a mini PI assessment. This could then also influence, in most organizations, again, this could influence this particular part, the third-party assessments, because your vendor is most probably selected, your third parties are selected, so you already need to start thinking, is this particular vendor compliant with our internal requirements? This could also influence the interpretation of legislation into solution options. So like we said, for example, if you're putting data into the cloud, we need to know that, okay, there's data that needs to go into a particular area. Which zone is it being hosted? Is it fine? What controls do they have, for example? Then from an analysis point of view, you now know the full solution, again, maybe at a very high level from a requirements perspective. But this is where you draw your as-is processes and to-be processes. And your as-is processes and to-be processes sometimes then can influence how information is flowing. In most organizations, you've got what are called asset registers or information inventories. Every time a solution is implemented, your organization becomes non-compliant if your information asset register is not matching with what you are doing on a solution. If there's a significant change in terms of how information is being processed, that means you've already become non-compliant, because what you are communicating in an information asset register is very different from what is on the ground. And most of the issues in organizations, like I said in the beginning, the problem statement is business does not know where information is. Initially, maybe the solution that was previously there, the as-is, information was on premise, or information we were collecting consent using certain things. Now we're using a full cloud solution. It means our information inventory is already out of date. Our processes have been updated, but our information flows and information inventories are no longer up to date. And the PMO or the business analysis office is most likely the area where we know what's happening with processes or systems. And then that helps the organizations in terms of compliance, in making sure that at least we have an information inventory. Let's say, I'm trying to find the word, how up to date they are. So for example, if you can have your information inventories at least up to date within 6 months, that would really help, or within 3 months, that would really help. organizations have got information inventories that were last updated when, for example, POPIA came into place in 2021, and they never came back and fixed them. The problem that happens when that is the issue is if you lose information, or if a data subject comes and says, can you please help me, which type of information do you process about me? Without updated information inventories, you will not be able to do those requests, for example. Similarly, for the purposes of time, when you move into design, build, and even in the testing and deployment, involve your privacy office, get your compliance approvals. In certain instances, it may require you to obtain regulatory approvals as well. Because in certain instances, there's a business justification, let's say, for example, to send information to America. And maybe you've agreed with your service provider for strict security controls in certain things. So you could obtain regulatory approvals or exceptions. Or if you are working, for example, in organizations such as banks, there's now requirements even from organizations such as the Prudential Authority or the SAB for regulatory approval, for example, to put data into the cloud. So it's not just an issue of if we don't do the proper regulatory approvals, or if we don't do these PIAs, no, the privacy office will sign. There's implications in terms of your licensing, even from, for example, from a banking perspective, if you're in the banking industry. Then by the time the solution is built, we need to ensure that the approved controls are then incorporated into the solution. So please see how much of the contribution or the type of steps that are needed. As a BA, you know the information, you know the processes, you must probably know how information flows because you've done your context diagrams, you've done your value chains, you must probably have done your enterprise analysis from level 0 up until level 5 from a process perspective. So hence the assumption or the hypothesis to say, as a BA, I fully understand how information flows in the organization, and I can help my colleagues within the privacy office to ensure that we are compliant, but it also helps my business areas to ensure that my solutions are quickly incorporated or are quickly approved. So like I said, from a BA contribution area point of view, privacy impact assessments, these are where we understand what type of risks are going to be produced by a particular initiative. So for example, when we are starting a new project, or we are buying new software, or we are changing service providers, privacy impact assessments are necessary to be done. Who best than the BA in the particular business area to understand that? Information inventories and flows, we also quite involved. From a process mapping, like I've just said earlier, we understand the enterprise from a value chain until the level, from level 0 up until level 5 processes. So our processes can actually be translated into information flows and see how information is flowing into the organization that then can be utilized in the event that the regulator comes through and says, we want to know which information is. It also helps in identifying who are the third parties where information is flowing to. And if there's a breach, it's quickly also easier for the organization to understand which are the entry points or the exit points of that particular information. Processing limitations, most organizations struggle with this particular part because there's a number of justifiable uses of information, and most organizations then, or most areas then have an issue where the justifiable or the purpose that you are using the information does not necessarily align with the purpose that it was collected for. So again, rules around building consent and also rules around minimality in terms of the data fields. We are now doing our detailed specifications to say we don't necessarily need to collect multiple multiple data. When the API, for example, is being built, we don't need to now just do a free-for-all because it's this particular option. Then from a just finally, from a data sovereignty and cross-border requirements, we need to make sure that we do not necessarily send data into the wrong areas. And also, we need to ensure data quality. Those are the areas that we can contribute as well. And lastly, data archiving and de-identification from a records management perspective. This is one of the biggest challenges that organizations are faced with and becomes an issue from a management point of view. Okay, so I stop here. My hypothesis is that the business analyst has a great organizational view that can support the Privacy Office in improving compliance, and I thank you.
Thank you so much, Warren, for that insightful presentation. There is a couple of questions in the chat. I'm just going to read it out if you don't mind, and we can go through each of them. So the first question is from Barin. What is the impact of privacy adoption practices in data transformation projects, especially dealing with legacy systems?
I think I'll try and hopefully I understand the question, but my understanding is the fact that we are migrating from legacy systems into most probably newer platforms, which may involve sending data into the cloud. That's one of the issues. Most of the people are coming from legacy systems and going into the cloud. So the impact of going into the cloud without approval. Then the other thing that we've picked up as well is the issue of data quality. Most legacy systems were built a long time ago without application of quality control. So it's almost like a shift from one area into the next hosting space without building the issues around quality. So there's a very limited disregard around that. No one knows what is sitting in the legacy systems. And then also lastly, the other issue from a legacy system is most organizations also don't switch off these legacy systems. So they continue utilizing this information, I think maybe for multiple years. So then there's issues around excessive or rather excessive retention of information, because no one has ever gone into those particular systems to go and do deletion or disposal. Most systems, actually legacy systems, most of them were not built with the ability to delete or dispose of information. So you've got multiple issues that you are dealing with. If I was to just quickly go to this slide, most probably from a legacy system, your processing limitation, further processing limitation, information quality, you can't meet it. Data subjects participation, you will most probably not be able to do so. And your security safeguards are most probably a bit compromised as well in those particular systems.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. I can so relate to that. The next question is, who do you recommend signs off the UAT for security and privacy requirements? Who should sign off the UAT? Or who do you recommend to sign off the user acceptance testing for those?
I think the business must sign off their requirements. But like I said in the, if I just go to this slide, if you now want to bring the privacy team to sign off when it's now UAT, I think it's a little bit too late and you are now going to have issues. If you involve your privacy team, and most organizations have built in the privacy by design or are building in the privacy by design principles, if I was involved in the needs analysis and most probably by the analysis and design phase, I can contribute to the signing off of UAT. But if you now call them to come and sign off something that has already been built, we're now going to deal with issues of exceptions and most probably projects now taking too much time without being approved, because now there's issues that may be picked up there.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Karabo. Who would be responsible to conduct the PI assessment and what triggers it?
So again, this is dependent on the organization, but your project owner will most probably need to be the one who triggers the PIA. And then PIAs also, or you can also have BAs. So that's why I'm making the case to say business analysts for me would be the best people, because we know the stakeholders. For example, we know the area, we know the processes, we know the systems. So the PIA privacy impact assessment is really to say, what is the impact of your initiative on privacy requirements? So like I said, it's technology, process, people, and policy. The BA knows that. So my hypothesis again is the fact that the BA can do that, but obviously the triggering needs to come through a proper PMO infused with privacy office process. I think it's not something that we can just do, but at a very high level, what triggers that? A new project, a change in a particular project, for example, that has been approved, purchases of new software, hosting services, your cloud services, those are quite critical. And then if you are disposing systems or you're sunsetting systems, and in certain instances when you are selling or buying businesses, those are some of the instances where you need to do PIAs.
Okay. Thank you so much, Warren. There's a lot of thanks in the chats. Thank you, Warren, for a great informative session. Thank you very much, Warren. Thank you, Warren, for a great session. It was very insightful. I would like to also echo the same. It was very eye-opening from a BA perspective to actually have sight of how we are impacting legislation with the new solution and changes to the solution and the organization as a whole, and what is expected from a privacy by design perspective. And just because privacy to be a culture in the organization is so important. From my side, thank you so much for everyone for joining. Have a great evening, Warren. All thanks for a great hour that you spent with us. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Enjoy. Bye.